Good afternoon, everyone. I want to reiterate the importance of finding other ways to be active in the next 2 weeks for those whose fitness or creative activities are paused. And at the same time, every one of us must do our part to embrace the measures that the Premier just announced. Now is the time to reduce the number of cohorts we are in and make changes to our lives to make it less likely that we will be exposed to COVID-19 or pass the virus to others. We are all in this together, and we must face this challenge together.
All politics aside, decision makers need clear and timely information when you're dealing with a crisis like this, and we simply did not receive that.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News with some good news indeed for those freedom fans out there. A massive legal win took place in the Ingram case when a Calgary judge ruled that Deena Hinshaw's COVID-19 restrictions violated the Public Health Act and that those laws were illegal. The ramifications of this ruling are, well, they're massive for people across the province still facing legal consequences, court battles, potentially even jail time stemming from these original health orders. Well, that is all set to evaporate as these laws have been struck down. In order to break this down, because of the massive scale of this, I wanted to bring on a few folks to discuss. First off, we're going to have Eva Chipiuk break down some of the logistics and facts that went into this ruling. And then after that, we're going to have John Carpay, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, discuss the implications and consequences moving forward.
What the ruling on this case did, which I think is very important for Albertans and Canadians to understand, is jurisdiction and power of people in government. And the only way people in government have power is what the statute and legislations and laws allow them. And it's very important that they stay within those boundaries, because otherwise what happens is people are ruling however they wish. So it's very important that they stick within their boundaries and their guidelines and following, obviously, the rule of law and the authorities they have. And in this case, what is so interesting about it is that the court ruled that the decision-making, the person who made the decision didn't have the authority to make that decision. Right. It was ultra vires. They didn't have legal authority. They shouldn't have been making that decision. That was elected officials in this case. It wasn't Dr. Hinshaw who had the legal authority to make that decision, who was making the decision. So in this case, the court would have had a very hard time to say that everything was done according to what they're allowed to do in the law, and the court could not. The judge said, no, these orders were made outside of the right person making them. Right. And so it's, the word ultra vires is just such a good one. We use it every time I try to explain it. It's kind of saying illegally enacted, or because that the legality of it just isn't there. Right. It didn't follow the law.
Does it stem from this that many people who are potentially facing charges going back to this, that's likely to be sort of removed or eradicated or away from the table because the law they were charged under has been deemed to be non-lawful?
Well, that's what some lawyers I've heard are saying, and I haven't had a chance to investigate all of that. Like, you have to know what the charges are and based on what they were made. If it was on the public order emergency orders, then yeah, maybe. As a lawyer, you don't want to say, it's all going to be wiped under the table unless you know about all of the tickets. So there's certainly a bit to investigate there, but I would suggest there's something worth looking at, and then on a case-by-case basis. And, I don't think we've heard a response from the government, which is interesting. It'll be interesting to hear what Alberta has to say about this decision.
Is this likely one of the bigger sort of rulings we've seen in relation to the COVID restrictions? I know it just pertains sort of in binding fashion to Alberta, but more broadly speaking, is this a big, big win?
I believe so. I think and what I've been trying really to help promote and raise awareness is that it's important for Canadians to always be vigilant in democracy. I think we've been really good at being incredibly apathetic. So I think this is just the first step, the first part. And you start asking questions. Why is Dr. Hinshaw making this? Or what, next time around, And that's why I think it's incredibly important that people start engaging and understanding how the political processes work, who's in charge of what. And if we don't know that, how are we going to question that as Canadians? So in that respect, I think you have a win for sure, because it's certainly gotten people talking. And I think that's in itself important. But yeah, I'm sure other provinces are looking at this right now, scratching their heads about what this means for them.
Well, I want to thank Eva for sharing her important perspective on this massive legal win here in the province of Alberta. And in just a few moments, we're actually going to be joined by John Carpay, the president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to thank the Wellness Company. They, in fact, made this video possible by sponsoring this important work we're doing. So before we jump to that conversation, we're just going to play a quick ad from them.
How in the world could such a small group of people with limited resources change world history? But in fact, that's happening, and it's the power of the truth. The truth is like kryptonite.
Healthcare isn't in some sense working very well. Foster Colson is thinking about this. He's got a new company, an online healthcare platform called the Wellness Company.
Telehealth company called the Wellness Company.
The Wellness Company.
The most popular product is the detoxification supplement that features nattokinase. Nattokinase is the only enzyme that we're aware of right now that dissolves the spike protein. Spike protein is loaded in the body with the COVID-19 infection and definitely with the vaccines. We've been completely accurate on the spread of the virus, early treatment, on the deficiencies in hospital care, and now the deaths that are occurring after vaccination. This is a human outrage, and it's occurring at the end of a hypodermic needle. Isn't it interesting? Natural substances combating this man-made disaster.
I guess first off, for folks out there who aren't familiar with this Ingram case, what's sort of the basis of the challenge?
So it was one of the first lockdown challenges filed in Canada. It was filed in December of 2020 after 9 months of lockdowns. And the outcome, July 31st, 2023. So, 2.5 years later, 2.75 years later, we get a result that the court invalidated the health orders of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Deena Hinshaw. And so that's positive, because it's going to mean that a lot of these prosecutions against people that are, facing a $2,000 fine because they had Christmas dinner with their mother or because they attended a peaceful outdoor protest, all these prosecutions cannot proceed because the law has been invalidated by all of these health orders, which are a form of law, have been invalidated by the Alberta Court of King's Bench.
Is this too little too late? Is there going to be sort of retroactive justice? What happens now?
Well, you're right. Justice delayed is justice denied. Absolutely. It is disgraceful that this would take 2.5 years. It's also disgraceful that the Alberta government, when it received the claim in December of 2020, asked for and received from the court 6 months to gather their evidence together. Like we'd have violations of our charter freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly. Later on with the vaccines, a violation of our charter right to bodily autonomy to decide for ourselves what we will or will not be injected with. All of these charter rights and freedoms. Now, if the government had a valid scientific and medical basis for these lockdowns, they should have been able to pull that together in a week or 2 or 3. And we should have had a ruling in December of 2020. Yeah. Instead, the government asks for 6 months to get its evidence together, which is outrageous. And the court says, yeah, sure, you can have 6 months. So it really is, it's a tragedy how long litigation takes in Canada. And it should be remedied by, in large part, it should be the appointment of more judges is a big part of that solution.
Is there any sort of remedy for those people who have already faced consequences, whether economic, personal, or mental even?
Sadly, probably not. One of our lawyers actually did some research on this point, because I asked the question, if you've paid $1,000 fine over being found guilty of violating a provincial health order, can you get your money back? The lawyer got back to me and said, no, it's not retroactive. It's unfortunate, but ultimately it's up to voters to hold the politicians accountable and make sure that we don't see these violations, which took place in large part because a lot of Canadians agreed with having their rights and freedoms taken away.
Yeah.
So we need that cultural shift to prevent this from happening in future. The court did invalidate these laws, which is going to be good for people that are getting prosecuted. The laws have been declared not valid. So if you were going to trial next week or next month, or if you were appealing a conviction, then you've got a good chance of that problem being cleared away because the law has been declared to be invalid. Right. Unfortunately, Justice Barbara Romaine, who was the Alberta Court of King's Bench judge who struck down these laws as invalid, she also did not do any cost-benefit analysis looking at the harms of lockdowns, how this led to depression and isolation and driving people to suicide, destroying livelihoods. She said that these violations of charter freedoms were justified, and she did no analysis on the cost-benefit. So that's extremely disappointing.
How important is it to have groups, whether it be the Justice Center, the Democracy Fund, or many other organizations out there that are willing to take a stand? And how important is it to support those groups?
Well, it's incredibly important. Human rights violations really go absolutely berserk when there is silence and nobody's speaking up anymore. That's when things really go off the deep end. But as long as you've got 5% or even 1% of the population that is speaking out saying, no, these human rights violations are wrong, it really it makes them less bad than what they would be. So it's incredibly important for individuals to speak out and for individuals to support organizations like the Democracy Fund and the Justice Center and other groups that are speaking out against the injustice. It's extremely important.
Well, make no mistake about it, this is one of the most significant legal wins that we have seen since the onset of COVID-19 and the restrictions that resulted, particularly here in Alberta. It was incredible to be joined by these two people who have been such fundamental legal freedom fighters throughout all of this from the very get-go. I remember sitting down with some of these folks right when this stuff was beginning. So much of what they said now having sort of come to fruition. Some of the concern that we have seen over the years as to whether justice would ultimately prevail. Clearly, we're not out of this yet entirely, but there are some incredibly positive signs. And this Ingram ruling, it is one of the sort of landmark, hallmark, critical rulings that we have been waiting for. Absolutely incredible news for everyone out there who has been watching this freedom fight so closely. As always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos. While legal victories undeniably continue to pile up, unfortunately, there are still people dealing with the health consequences of the medical coercion that took place these last few years. That's why I'm very grateful that the Wellness Company exists. It's a group of doctors who often lost their jobs for daring to question the wisdom of medical advice coming out or even to speak up against lockdowns. And they've come together and they're creating some incredible products with the intention of helping people who are struggling. One of these great products is their Spike formula, and it is one of the only sort of products out there on the market that contains ingredients that are supposed to help break down the spike proteins that you hear so much about. So I want to thank the Wellness Company for the important work they're doing and also for supporting and making the work that we do possible.